I woke up on my wedding day, and this time I refused to be anyone's lifeboat. My wedding was held on a white yacht anchored off the coast of Santa Barbara. The ocean that day was so blue it almost looked unreal. The deck was covered in white roses, champagne glasses, violin music, and more than 100 guests waiting with polite smiles for me to walk down the aisle. I was wearing a custom wedding gown from New York. My hair was pinned low, and my veil was so delicate that it trembled whenever the sea breeze passed through it. Everything was perfect, until Sophie Bell fell into the ocean. Sophie was the childhood friend of Daniel Hayes, my fiancé. To outsiders, she was just an old family friend. To Daniel, she was an unhealed wound, the love his family never approved of, the girl he always called like a sister. Even though every time she cried, he would immediately leave me behind. In my previous life, when Sophie fell into the water, Daniel turned to me. He could not swim. He had been terrified of water since he nearly drowned on a camping trip as a child. He gripped my hand, his voice shaking. "Claire, you're a strong swimmer. Please save her. Sophie saved me when we were kids. I can't just stand here and watch her die." Around us, the guests began looking at me. Someone said, "The bride knows how to swim, right? Then she should go. Saving a life matters more." Someone else whispered, "It's a human life." Another person said bluntly, "If it were me, I wouldn't hesitate." All those eyes pressed down on me like stones. I did not want to be the selfish woman on my wedding day. I did not want to be accused of standing by while someone died. And most of all, I did not want Daniel to look at me with disappointment. So I jumped. I had been on the swim team in school. I thought rescuing someone in the water could not be that hard. But being a good swimmer and saving a panicked drowning person are two completely different things. Sophie grabbed me as if I were the last floating thing in the world. She wrapped her arms around my neck, kicked wildly under the water, and dragged me down with her. I tried to push her away so I could breathe, but the more she struggled, the deeper we sank. When the rescue crew pulled us out, Sophie had only swallowed a little seawater. I suffered serious lung damage. The wedding was postponed. I stayed in the hospital for months, and my health never recovered. In public, Daniel took gentle care of me. He told everyone that I was Sophie's savior, the woman he would be grateful to for the rest of his life. Behind my back, he slowly took control of the company my parents had left me. I trusted him. I signed the authorization papers. I let him join the board. I gave him access to the company's finances while I was still lying in a hospital bed. By the time I realized what was happening, Morgan Group was no longer truly mine. Daniel filed for divorce. Sophie moved into the apartment he had bought for her with my money. And I, the woman who had jumped into the ocean to save her, died in a cold hospital room, every breath stabbing through my lungs like a needle. I died full of hatred. Then I opened my eyes again, and I heard the scream from the ocean. "Help me! Daniel! Save me!" I was standing on the yacht deck. I was still wearing my white wedding gown. In front of me, Daniel was gripping the railing, his face pale, half his body already over the side. In the water, Sophie was thrashing in her champagne-colored silk dress. The life jacket she had been wearing earlier had slipped off and was floating several yards away. I stared at the scene and understood immediately. I had come back. Back to the exact moment Sophie tried to turn my wedding into a stage for her love story with Daniel. In my previous life, I later learned that the yacht wedding had been Sophie's idea. She knew Daniel was afraid of water. She also knew that if she fell into the sea, Daniel would panic, and I would be pushed into the position of saving her. She wanted to prove that in Daniel's heart, she mattered more than the bride. She wanted me to feel humiliated enough to walk away on my own. But in my previous life, I did not just walk away. I lost my entire life. This time I took 2 steps back. Daniel turned and looked at me. Hope flashed in his eyes exactly like before. "Claire," he shouted. "You can swim. Save Sophie." I did not jump. I grabbed the nearest life ring and threw it hard into the water. Then I turned to the crew and shouted with all my strength. "Someone fell overboard. Call the rescue team. Call the Coast Guard now. No one without training should jump in." The deck erupted into chaos. Several crew members ran toward the rescue boat. The wedding videographer also turned his camera toward the deck. Daniel was still clinging to the railing, trembling. He wanted to look like the man who would risk everything for Sophie, but his fear of water had frozen him in place. I stepped closer, close enough for everyone to hear but still far enough to stay safe. "Daniel," I said, my voice shaking like that of a betrayed bride. "Today is our wedding. You can't swim but you're still willing to jump in for her. Did you ever think about how I would feel?" Daniel's face stiffened. He immediately understood what I was doing. I was dragging everything into the light in front of all our guests. Before he could say anything, I continued. "If you love her so much that you're willing to die for her, then why are you marrying me?" Whispers spread through the crowd. Sophie's mother, Maya Bell, rushed over. She had once worked as the Hayes family's housekeeper. She had always seen Daniel as her daughter's ticket to a better life. In my previous life, after I became sick, she often stood beside my hospital bed and hinted that the woman Daniel truly loved was Sophie. Now she dropped to her knees in front of Daniel. "Mr. Daniel, please save her. Sophie saved you once. You can't abandon her." The guests were being pulled back into moral judgment again. A middle-aged man said, "If she saved Daniel's life before, he should do something." A woman looked at me. "The bride knows how to swim, doesn't she?" I turned to her, and tears immediately fell from my eyes. "I can swim, but I'm not a trained lifeguard. A drowning person in panic can pull their rescuer down with them. We are on a yacht with a rescue crew, life rings, and rescue boats. Why does everyone want a bride in a wedding dress to jump into the ocean?" No one answered, because the question was too clear. In my previous life, they could pressure me because I stayed silent. This time I would not. I looked back at Daniel. "If you want to save her, wait for the rescue crew. Don't turn this into proof of love and drag another person into the water." Daniel gritted his teeth. Maybe because too many people were watching, he could not climb back down. He also could not admit he was afraid. He held onto the railing and tried to climb a little farther, as if to prove he had courage. But his hand slipped. For one brief moment his eyes met mine. I did not reach out. I did not push him. I simply refused to be his lifeboat again. Daniel fell into the ocean. Screams broke across the deck. He landed close to Sophie. White foam burst across the surface, swallowing both of them for several seconds. The yacht's rescue crew finally lowered the boat. I stood by the railing, one hand gripping my wedding dress, the other trembling against my chest. To everyone else, I looked like a bride so terrified she could barely stand. But inside I was strangely calm. This time, the person who had to taste the fear of sinking into the sea was not me. Daniel and Sophie were pulled out soon after. Sophie recovered faster. She had only swallowed water and suffered a few minor injuries. Daniel's condition was much worse. He had always been afraid of water, and when he fell in, he panicked, swallowed a large amount of seawater, and was deprived of oxygen for several minutes. The yacht's medical crew gave him emergency care before a helicopter took both of them to the hospital. I knelt outside the yacht's medical room and cried until my voice went hoarse. "Why did you do this?" I sobbed in front of everyone. "If you loved Sophie, you could have just told me. I would never have forced you to marry me. Why did you have to turn my wedding into this?" The cameras were still rolling. The guests were silent. The same people who had urged me to jump into the water now could not even look me in the eye. That afternoon, I arrived at the hospital in my wrinkled wedding dress. Daniel's mother, Margaret Hayes, rushed toward me the moment she saw me and tried to slap me. "This is your fault," she screamed. "Daniel has been afraid of water since he was a child. If you hadn't insisted on having a yacht wedding, my son would never have ended up like this." Before I could speak, my wedding planner stepped in front of me. "Mrs. Hayes, the yacht wedding was suggested by Miss Sophie Bell during a planning meeting 3 months ago. We have the email confirmation." Margaret's face changed instantly. Another bridesmaid of mine, who happened to be a legal assistant, opened her phone. "We also have full video footage from the yacht. Mr. Hayes climbed over the railing by himself. Miss Morgan did not touch him. If you continue making false accusations, we will document them as evidence." Margaret choked on her words. In my previous life, I had lain in a hospital bed with no one standing beside me. This time I had prepared my own people. After leaving the hospital, I did not rush to post anything online. American readers do not usually trust a person who only cries and complains. They trust evidence, timelines, and consistency. So I contacted my lawyer. I requested backup copies of all wedding footage. I saved the email showing Sophie had suggested the yacht wedding. I sent a notice to Morgan Group's board of directors that Daniel Hayes was no longer allowed to attend any internal company meetings. Legally, Daniel and I had registered our marriage 1 week before the ceremony to make paperwork easier. The yacht wedding was only the public celebration. That meant if I did not act quickly, Daniel could still use his status as my husband to access my assets in my company. In my previous life, I lost because I trusted too easily. In this life, I would win through documents. The next day, Daniel woke up. I went to visit him at the hospital. He lay in bed, his face pale, his voice hoarse. An oxygen mask rested beside him, and the heart monitor beeped steadily. I entered with my personal lawyer and an assistant. The moment Daniel saw me, his eyes reddened with anger. "Claire," he said weakly, "why didn't you jump in this time?" The words this time made my heart stop for a second. He remembered too. Daniel had also come back just like I had. I looked at him, my expression still gentle. "What are you talking about?" I threw a life ring and called for help. He tried to sit up, but a coughing fit shook his entire body. "No. You were supposed to jump in and save Sophie. Then you were supposed to get sick. I was supposed to take care of you. You would be grateful, and you would hand the company over to me." My lawyer immediately looked at me. I placed a light hand on her shoulder, signaling for her to let him keep talking. Daniel seemed unable to control himself. Maybe the lack of oxygen had damaged his mind. Maybe the memories from our previous life had terrified him into losing his grip. He looked at me with hatred and panic. "Morgan Group was supposed to be mine. Sophie is the woman I love. You only needed to be an obedient wife and give me the company. Why did everything turn out like this?" I stood still. So even after being reborn, a man like Daniel did not regret hurting me. He only regretted that his plan had failed. I looked at him and said, "Daniel, you're sick. Get some rest." Then I turned and left the hospital room. From that day on, I began clearing my life of him. At the company, I reviewed every employee Daniel had recommended. Those who had secretly passed information to him were fired. Contracts with suspicious terms were sent to the legal department. I hired a new chief financial officer. I regained control of the board. I brought 2 of the bridesmaids who had helped me into the communications and legal departments. They had once been underestimated because of their ordinary backgrounds, but they were smarter, faster, and more loyal than many people with impressive resumes. 3 months later, Morgan Group had not collapsed. Instead, we signed 2 major contracts. Daniel, meanwhile, kept getting worse. He called me constantly. Sometimes he said he loved me. Sometimes he begged me to sell part of the company to pay his medical bills. Sometimes he mentioned our previous life and said I owed him another chance. I recorded everything. Sophie was no longer gentle either. At first, she stayed at the hospital to take care of Daniel, trying to prove her love. But after the accident, Daniel became weak, bitter, and difficult. He needed someone to help him sit up, prepare his medicine, and handle even the smallest personal tasks. Their romantic love could not survive the smell of disinfectant, hospital bills, and sleepless nights. A month later, Sophie disappeared from the hospital. Daniel tried to get back the small apartment he had once bought for her. The problem was that the apartment had been purchased after Daniel and I had legally registered our marriage, using money that had passed through a joint account, most of which had come from my funds for wedding expenses and family investments. My lawyer filed a lawsuit immediately. Sophie refused to back down. She and her mother appeared in front of Morgan Group, kneeling and crying in front of people recording them on their phones. "Claire Morgan is using her money and lawyers to force us into a corner," Sophie's mother cried. "My daughter only loved a man. What crime did she commit?" The video spread quickly. Some accounts began calling me a cruel wife, a rich bride bullying a poor woman. But this time I was no longer passive. I made one post. No insults. No crying. No long emotional explanation. I posted only the timeline. 1. The email where Sophie suggested the yacht wedding. 2. The video of Daniel leaving his bride behind and climbing over the railing for Sophie. 3. The recording of Daniel admitting he wanted me to become sick so he could take control of my company. 4. The transaction records for the apartment Daniel bought for Sophie using funds connected to our joint account. 5. The civil lawsuit accepted by the court. Public opinion shifted quickly. People may enjoy drama, but Americans are especially sensitive to two things: financial fraud and public manipulation. Sophie went from poor, pitiful girl to a woman who disrupted a wedding, accepted a home from a married man, and cried victim when she was sued. Daniel went from tragic man in love to a husband who used marriage to target his wife's company. Daniel's mother tried to call me, asking me to withdraw the lawsuit because family matters should not be made public. I replied, "No, Mrs. Hayes. This is no longer a family matter. This is about property, the law, and my reputation." The court later ruled that Sophie had to return the apartment or repay its equivalent value. Around the same time, the Hayes family supermarket chain was investigated for financial violations and food safety issues. I did not make anything up. I simply handed the documents I had to the proper authorities. The rest was handled by the law. Daniel was moved out of the VIP hospital room. Margaret no longer had the money or connections to preserve her son's image. Sophie disappeared from the media after losing the lawsuit. I did not feel as triumphant as I had imagined I would. Maybe revenge does not truly make a person happy. It only gives you back something more important, the right to breathe. A few weeks later, Daniel asked to see me one last time. I went to the hospital. He had lost a great deal of weight. The face that had once made my heart race was now only tired and frightened. When he saw me, he began to cry. "Claire," he said, "I was wrong. Sophie misled me. I really love you. If you save me this time, I promise I'll only love you from now on." I pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. "Daniel," I said, "you still think love is something you can trade when you need money?" He froze. I looked directly into his eyes. "You didn't love me in the previous life. You don't love me in this one either. You only love the life you could take from me." He trembled and reached out, trying to hold my hand. I moved away. "Claire," he whispered, "you remember too, don't you?" I smiled faintly. "Yes." Daniel's eyes widened. I leaned closer and spoke softly enough that only he could hear. "Because I remember, I didn't jump into the ocean this time." Daniel stared at me as if he had just seen the final verdict of his life. I stood up. "You are not here because I refused to save Sophie. You are here because of every choice you made. You chose betrayal. You chose manipulation. You chose greed. Now you're just receiving the bill." That was the last time I saw Daniel Hayes. Not long after, he died from complications following the accident and his declining health. I did not attend the funeral. I did not send flowers. I only signed the final divorce documents and the papers ending all remaining ties between our assets. On the day everything was finally over, I returned to the marina where the wedding had once taken place. The ocean was still blue. The wind still moved through my hair. But this time I was not wearing a wedding dress. I wore a cream-colored linen dress and came with the 4 women who had once stood in front of me at the hospital. We rented a small boat and went out into the bay. No expensive champagne. No white roses. No false vows. Only sunlight, wind, and real laughter. I stood at the bow and looked out at the endless sea. In my previous life, I thought love meant jumping into the water for someone. In this life, I finally understood. The first kind of love I needed to learn was not drowning myself for anyone. I was no longer the bride abandoned on the deck. I was no longer the lifeboat for someone else's love story. I was Claire Morgan. I had my company. I had my life. And from now on, if anyone wanted to jump into the ocean for love, they would have to learn how to swim by themselves.